Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles to the Angelo Robles Podcast. I'm also the founder and CEO at Family Office Association. To give a little bit of context to who we are and my point or my perspective in our discussions, I'll provide a little bit of context to that comment. I help global families and their family offices solve problems, procure positive future outcomes, and prepare for intergenerational necessity. It's vital for families and their family offices to understand their vulnerabilities and become more resilient so they can mitigate risk and prevail during times of crisis. My experience with some of the wealthiest families in the world has allowed me to distill best practices for discovering purpose and refining vision, governance structures, systems, processes, and culture that successful families and their safeguard family office need in order to thrive. I help families create or reinvent their family office to be of institutional quality and highly adaptive. Today's podcast is titled Breaking Up the Family Office, Splitting, Financing, Structuring, when family members want their own family office. Our special guest today is a frequent guest and one of our favorites, Allan Zacharia, who is co-CEO of Pathstone, one of the largest and most successful and grandest of the multifamily offices. It's always a pleasure to have Allan on. He's quite the thought leader in the community. Allan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Angelo. Happy to be here.
And I was saying before we started to record, and I'll repeat now that we're recording, about a week into COVID, I started to do what I didn't plan it this way back. I think it was on March 21st, daily Zooms. I normally have occasionally done digital meetings, and I've done a podcast for 2 or 3 years, one a month, probably on average. But Allan was the first guest in kind of the new COVID world back in relatively kind of mid to late March. And you started a trend of me needing to put on a suit and tie in my home office and do these like every day now. It's my new global brand. And Allan, it's part of it is thanks to you.
Well, my apologies for not having a tie on for you today, Angelo, and your guests.
Well, I like to be jealous.
I was lucky I had a sport coat here at the office.
What matters, Allan, is not the look, although you look fine and dapper, it's the content. Always. So I do want to set the stage a little bit for today's discussion. This is becoming more and more common, and it's a topic that you rarely hear spoken about at what used to be physical events or even online. And it's a little bit of it could be an uncomfortable, depending on the family situation, topic. So to give a little bit from my color and perspective on it, we're seeing a bifurcation right now in the country. Just look at politics with what's going on. And let's be realistic. These issues of disagreeing happen in family offices all the time on direction, on investing. So, don't think this doesn't happen in family offices. It happens way more than probably people are wanting to admit. Now, there's many factors that lead into this. The controlling wealth creator often will run the family enterprise and business, a little bit of a dictator model. They may have a odd board of 3, but effectively the decision maker is one. And the problem, as that person progresses on and inevitably passes away or just loses a sense of interest in it, the younger generation doesn't really have a great governance model to follow. It's the dictator model, which 99% of the time is not going to work well for them. Everyone has their own opinions and their own thoughts. Now, would it be better if the family could work together to work around problems by having open discussions, and disagreeing is fine? They get increased purchasing power, unity, diversity adds value. You don't want everyone agreeing exactly with what you're saying. And you're rowing together as opposed to rowing apart. But that's made some of you sound a little Pollyanna and be a little bit unrealistic. So then the question becomes, if breaking apart is inevitable, and sometimes that is the best choice if it's going to be that difficult and family issues inside the family that you're bringing into the office, and it's even uncomfortable for some of the executives that could be in the office, then possibly that issue revolving breaking away, what I defined as splitting. And then you have issues of financing and structuring. Allan, boy, I gave a kind of a lot to chew on there. Why don't we lay the foundation for why you're starting to see more of this regarding some of the issues I already described?
Sure, you said a mouthful, Angelo. That is for sure. I think the topic today, which is an important topic, is really part of a trend that we've been seeing with single family offices. And I'll also, and as you and I, prepped for this, as I mentioned to you in the preparation, I will also sort of reference my experience in working with not just family offices, but closely held family enterprises and businesses, because they have many of these same issues come up as the next generation, whatever the next generation is, comes into a maturity or leadership of either the business or the family office. Many single family offices in this country were formed as businesses that were created post World War II, liquidated, and the family was used to being invested together in this private equity thing called a family business. And then post the liquidity event of the sale of their business, they created a family office. And so it's usually the founding generation of the business was the founding generation of the family office. Those folks are today in their 80s, 90s, maybe they're no longer with us. And so the next generation of the family is coming into either the leadership or they're seeing a family office that was created for them, not by them. And so in many cases, they're questioning what was created for them, not by them. And, one of the things we are seeing is people are questioning the efficacy of the office, the cost of the office, the sheer fact that there may be, 10 or 15, 3 or 4 people employed in that office. And do they want to continue to run this business called the family office? So one of the things we've seen is just a general trend towards questioning the future of the family office, and the next generation saying, what do I want the family office to be for me? How do I want it to look? Do I want to continue to run this as a single family office? Do I want to bifurcate it? Do we want to professionalize it? We're also seeing some single family offices that are professional, that are actually becoming MFOs, whether it's an MFO that's just from a cost sharing perspective or a commercial MFO like we created at Pathstone some 10 years ago. So those are sort of overall trends. We are also seeing that as part of that trend, some, family offices have the word family in them for a reason. And, you don't get to pick your family members. And, family is for life. So in many cases, if there is conflict that's been created in a family operating enterprise or within a family office, one of the best things to do to keep harmony in the family is to find, if the conflict is created around the capital, if it's created around the wealth that's being managed or the operations of the family office, one of the best ways to basically resolve the conflict is to separate from the family office or from the business. And so we've seen this, and we at Pathstone have had multiple occasions in the last several years where we've had inbound inquiries from single family offices wanting to know if we would set up a virtual family office for a family member that is going to separate and do their own thing away from the existing family office. So, it's definitely a trend. I think it's a trend within a trend. It's part of a larger trend. And so it's, I'm happy to get into the details, et cetera, but we are seeing it a lot. And organizations like ours, and there are other, many organizations in the country that have the skill set to do this.
Yeah, well, you said a lot there as well, Alan, and that's fantastic. I effectively completely concur. A trend that I'm seeing is it pretty much what I kind of set up. The older generation moves on, the younger generation in their late 20s through often whatever, early to mid 40s, never really had a connection to the family office. And part of it falls on them, but certainly part of it falls on the wealth creator and the executives that are leading the family office. Talk about job security. That is not a good position to be in, to have job security, by the way. And that may say something about leadership within that family office, and that could be a separate issue. But good things that I'm seeing from the next generation that has an interest in continuing the family office, and most family offices just die. They fade away with the person that effectively created it. But the younger generation does appear to look at it with more carefully. They want it to be more rigorous, more institutional. And I know this is going to make some people on the call or on the Zoom feel a little uncomfortable, but it's just what I hear from the next generation is, Angelo, I felt that daughter mom picked people that were contemporaries of theirs. Often they had a successful career, but now they're in kind of a quasi, I'm not going to say semi-retirement, but it's going to be their last stop. And they're trustworthy, but they're kind of cruising along. And the younger generation's not going to accept that. They're going to want, you can't improve what you can't measure. They're going to want to hold it to a higher standard. They're going to want it to be more effective, technology savvy. And unfortunately, that's where the disconnect is going to happen. And this is where you'll see some of the challenges brewing into governance. So my question for you, Alan, relates to governance. Governance is how decisions are made. And if they're going to be the dictator model, that is super easy. And I know it may initially work well, but it's going to be a terrible model for having a succession plan and continuing with harmony within the family. If you're going to be collaborative, then how do you structure the board? Do you do majority consensus? How do you work with families on taking the step back, understanding their mission, their vision, and structuring governance?
So I think, Angelo, you said a lot there as well. And, this issue around governance is not something to be, dealt with, 20 years later after, you call it a dictator model, but, the founder who rules with, the proverbial iron fist, and, sets the rules, and then candidly, that model is what drives a lot of next gen way. And it's the same thing candidly in operating family businesses as well. I mean, the dynamics are very similar. So, in the family office construct, the family office has the wonderful opportunity early on to start to bring the next gen into the purpose of the wealth. Every family office is dealing with managing, a significant amount of wealth, at least all of the family offices that we've been associated with. That wealth was created somehow through some typical, yes, we do have, some, multi-gen fifth and sixth generation family offices that, have famous names that we all know. But, the great majority of the single family offices in this country came from, wealth creating events that were concentrations of wealth, typically in a family business. And the liquidity was created and the office was formed. So I think part of the governance structure, and we encourage anyone that'll listen to start these conversations, not, 20 years later when the children are adult children in their 50s or 40s and 50s, but to start in bringing the next gen into the governance structure of the family office, into the educational component of the family office, post college, in your mid 20s, early 30s, and start to ask, not to ask, but to start to create a governance where people can vote and they can, they can articulate how they want to be involved. It also, what I would say is it gives the, family, when the family has an operating company and the business is part of the fabric of a community that family lived in and created a lot of jobs and was very philanthropic, the family, it's this glue that holds the family together. Once that operating company is liquidated, and now we have a family office that's a financial family office, and we're managing financial capital. And listen, many family offices are continuing to be very entrepreneurial and investing in new opportunities, et cetera. But most of these family offices and the wealth, there was what's the legacy? What did my grandparents do? What was the business that created this wealth? What was their value set? And when we start to educate the next generation sooner than later, when we bring them into, wealth has, there's a certain amount of what I'll call responsibility that comes with the kind of wealth that we talk about here. And so how do we educate? How do we bring the next gen into the governance? Well, we do that through formal structures. We create, org charts. We create, a set of rules and jobs, et cetera, that we give people an opportunity to ascribe to. And so, I would say part of the reason that, if the dictator model was the model that was in the operating company, and then we've sold the business, and now we have a family office of liquidity, and that dictator model is still there, it's no different. If you wait to start to then say, okay, whether it's the matriarch or the patriarch, if you start to do this planning when they're in their 80s, okay, it's really too late. I mean, this governance work needs to start early. And, not everybody is going to want, not every family member is going to want to participate in the family office. I mean, we see this often. We have multiple clients that we work with where, in the next generation, there may be 4 people, there may be 2 branches of a family in the next generation that's 6 or 8 people. And you may only have 1 or 2 people in that generation that actually want to be part of the operations of the family office. If you start that process early, you have a much greater chance of success in transitioning that family office with family leadership. If you start late, then that's where you get into problems.
That is for sure. Now let's get into the issue of, let's just assume for whatever reason it's not working out. And as opposed to having the family disintegrate and have effectively be completely fractured, there's a decision. And sometimes this is the right decision. We're still family. I want there to be nothing uncomfortable around the holidays, around whatever, our cousins, our nieces, etc. But I think so we maintain as a family, I do want to go in a different direction with my portion of the capital and resources. I don't want to make this get ugly with intra-family squabble and lawsuits, and only the lawyers are going to win out there. Henceforth, the family now decides, whatever their resources are, that maybe it is best to do a valuation of the assets and have the families effectively create their own SFO. Among the most iconic families in this country, we would all know the names. You'll often see 5, 6, 7, 8 different single family offices for exactly that reason. But what I will say is the family still has a sense of harmony and it works. They just, from a business and investing perspective, and maybe different goals they have relative to their time horizons and their investing, they just elect it's best to go in a different way. Assuming that that's the direction they want to go, how do you go about evaluating and unwinding the assets and resources?
Well, I think it all starts, with the legal agreements that are in place at the beginning. And I have a saying that I adopted from a client of mine some 25 years ago: that good paper makes for good friends. And maybe we could even amend that to say good paper makes for good family harmony. So, I think one of the things that, that goes back to the beginning. So, is there enough flexibility, okay, and optionality built into the structure of the family office, such that if there is disharmony in the family, and one of the ways to keep the family together, or keep, a particular family member who may be wayward, et cetera, is there a good governance structure? Is there good paper in place to allow for an orderly, I'll say, separation? And I mean, we know the articles, and we know the history of certain of the more iconic families in this country. I would say the ones we read about in the press are billionaire plus families. And when you take that and the level of wealth and you start to, bifurcate it and split it up, there is still significant enough wealth to create maybe multiple single family offices from the original office, if you will. I would say if you're dealing with, and again, I have to say this a little tongue in cheek, but families of more modest wealth, 200 million, 300 million, again, it's rarefied air. And, I have to always remember the gratitude that I have to be able to do the kind of work that we get to do, and who we get to work with. But if it's, if someone's carving off, a $50 million piece or a $75 million piece of a $300 million, managed family office, then that creates a different set of, complications. And that's where, and again, I'm not here to, I'm to promote my firm or what my firm does. I'm here to provide you and your constituents, with hopefully a little guidance and discussion and thought-provoking discussion, I hope, Angelo. But at that point, then you really do need to look at some sort of a hybrid, virtual family office type scenario that, where someone can get all of the services that they are used to getting from their family office, from investment management and administration and tax, risk management, et cetera. But they're not going to be in a position where they can go hire and staff it the way it was staffed in the larger single family office. So one, it's about, we started this conversation talking about governance. It's about having good governance and good paper in place so that allows for someone to exit if they want to exit, that they can vote. No one wants to be held hostage or captive to something that they don't want to be a part of. So, in the design phase, or let's say the redesign phase, we want to make sure that there's the flexibility that allows people to come and go if they want to. So that's what I would say would be one piece. And the other piece would be, again, based on the size of the wealth involved, whether or not we can organize a new single family office, or they need to look at some sort of a hybrid virtual type model.
And in terms of if the assets are in privately held companies in real estate, obviously we're then going to need to do a valuation, perhaps of more than one firm, to kind of get a somewhat of a consensus or agreement on the valuation. But if they are private companies in real estate that are not so easy to split, and that person wants completely out so they could completely do their own thing, that may also require liquidating at a bad time. So other options could be looking at the banking relationships. Could you do lending against certain assets? Could certain assets be broken apart? Could other assets be sold? I mean, it's not overly complicated, but there is a specific sequence that does take time that you would have to go through, and there will be some tough choices that need to be made.
Well, look, when it comes to non-traded, private enterprises, whether it's real estate, whether it's some other operating company. And I've shared this with you before, but in my experience and I'll say, I'm in my 40th year of post-college gainful employment. I've been doing this kind of work for over 30 years. But in my experience, what happens is that there is a family member, and usually it's a next gen, second gen, third gen family member who is part of, has a significant amount of their net worth tied up in an operating enterprise or part of the family office's direct PE or real estate holdings. And they have decided that there is something that they have a passion for that they want to do away from the family, and in several cases where that next generation family member has looked at the market and has made on their own mind up that the business, either the family business or these particular closely held enterprises we're speaking of, that they're headed for trouble, and they've tried to get the family to take a different direction, and the family has been unwilling to, and so they want to take their chips off the table and go in a different direction on their own because they've read the market a different way than the family. And I will say, and again, I'm sure there are many instances where this has been done and the individual has cashed out. We can talk about how you cash out, et cetera, and has gone on to, great success. But in my limited set, in my experience with the clients that I've had the opportunity to work with, that has never worked out. The family member has had it, has tried to, has liquidated. And when they liquidate, they're typically liquidating at a discount to full liquidating value.
Absolutely.
You talk about, from a planning perspective, and I'm an estate planner at my core, but from a planning perspective, when we're doing estate and wealth transfer planning, we talk about these discounts for lack of marketability and lack of control. Well, those discounts work because in the real world, if someone wants to exit and they want to sell their, illiquid, non-voting, non-controlling or non-controlling piece of an enterprise, they're going to get a discounted value. So I've seen and I've experienced next gen family members who've done this with very large operating family businesses. They take a discount to get out, and at least in my experience, where they've taken the capital and what they've done with it has not worked out as well as if they had basically stayed invested with the family into the family enterprise. Now that's, from more of an operating company perspective. So, most operating companies, especially closely held ones that have had good advice, they have a shareholders agreement or, in place that dictates what happens to the equity of the business in all sorts of circumstances, unfortunate death and disability, what happens to the equity, but also if someone wants to exit, again, back to my earlier comment, good paper makes for good friends or good family members. If there's a, hopefully, and if, that there's a shareholder agreement, there's a unit holder, whatever, however the equity is styled, that there's an agreement out there that will dictate how the shareholders, relate to one another when someone wants to exit. And so hopefully there's and so then depending if it's an operating business, then it's no different than any operating business that needs to take out a shareholder. You either finance it internally, you have the liquidity available in the business to do so. The business takes on debt, or the business just, redeems the shareholder for a note and moves forward. Now, in a family office context where maybe the family is managing multiple pools of capital, under a for-profit family structure, and the particular family member is invested in 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 pools of capital, again, that limited partnership agreement or that LLC agreement, if it's, has the most flexibility for designed into it and optionality, it's going to have a mechanism for that family member to redeem out of that, of that investment partnership. Again, if the assets inside the partnership are illiquid or private equity, you got to deal with what we all have to deal with when we're trying to get someone out of an illiquid investment. So there's discounts involved, there may be leverage involved, and again, but it all starts with having a good, solid agreement in place at the beginning that allows for people to know they have the optionality, know they have the flexibility, and that they're not, tied to the office or the business when they don't want to be.
Yeah, very good points. And a lot of that simply, again, goes back to governance, the opportunity to communicate, for collaboration, and for optionality, partially, of course, due to contractual law and the agreements in place. But that's the orderly way. The disorderly way is where the legal documents are rather limited from the flexibility of someone looking to exit, and that person thus gets the type of attorney that's just going to make it difficult for everyone. Well, we're going to claim fiduciary breaches. We're going to claim they invested too aggressively, too conservatively. They cost you money. And then after decades, and I'm exaggerating it a little bit, of just family broken apart legal bills, it's
Well, this often happens, Angela.
it's a mess.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but you see this often happen in really old trust agreements, where there was a significant amount of wealth that was left in multi-generational trust, and there's a next third, second or third, in some cases, fourth generation beneficiary who has very, very limited optionality. And they see, and especially in situations where you may have someone who finds themselves in that position, and there still may be an operating enterprise involved, and they're not part of the wealth creation engine, and they have no say and they have no vote, and they're just sitting there as a beneficiary. And listen, we should say, hey, you should be grateful that you're in that position, but everyone wants to feel, we all want to be able to have some sense of control of our lives and the direction. And again, it goes back to teaching people early on what was the source of the wealth, the legacy, and the purpose, and then really, I think in the situations where we, at least certainly the very public, names and things that find their way into the press, those are situations where, people were dictated to. They were told, you should just be grateful for what you have and you shouldn't ask any questions. And no one, that's not a modern way to deal with things, and that's just lack of communication. So, in my best advice, working with these type of families, we try to get the communication started as soon as the family is comfortable to start to communicate, and to utilize the family office as an educational and communication tool early in life. Those family, and it may very well be that if they've had those conversations sooner than later, if people are on the same page, then that next generation family member who really wants to go do something else feels empowered to have a voice, to be able to come to the senior generation leadership and, in an appropriate and respectful give and take, articulate what they feel, articulate how they, why they want to do what they want to do. And sometimes if they've built a good communication structure, if they've built a good governance structure, that next gen may find out that the senior generation actually wants to support what they're wanting to do. And they don't have to leave. They can actually do it together. So again, I go back to, sooner than later, communication is key, and education and governance. And if people push those things down the road, they keep kicking the can down the road, we'll deal with that another year, that's when I think people find themselves in trouble.
And that is unfortunately the more common approach, because these are difficult subjects. They're not quite as engaging as the next direct investment we're going to make, or other topics that seem to be a little bit less challenging. But you're correct. And I know it sounds so simple. We've had from Jim Grubman to Dennis Jaffe to so many others on. And again, purpose, vision, mission, governance. And then really the one word they all come back to, and I mean, they all come back to, keep an open line of communication. Communicate. Even when you disagree, be cordial, but have that dialogue, communicate. That's very, very important. We do have a question from one of our participants in typical Angelo style. It's a little bit long. I am going to read it right now. With the increase of family discord from the inherited family office, are there more models of single family office members joining together with others outside the family without going to another firm and being more limited with their sole AUM? I get that an MFO is an option, but one more focused on the benefits of what the SFO provided in terms of education, governance, impact, and deal flow. But I guess, Allan, from what the person asking is describing, combining with other families, that would not make it a single family office in the definition of the exemption per the SEC, but it may mean a non-commercial small MFO or possibly a private trust company, but I'll let you answer.
Well, I'm not a private trust company expert, but I'll just say that in my experience in dealing with those, the private trust company world is really for, the $500 million family and above. So I'll just park that as just a quick aside. The idea of separating and going into joining forces with some other unrelated parties, I mean, that's always an option. One of the things I just kind of wanted to reflect on, just to kind of close up what we were saying a few minutes ago, is it's interesting to me. Advisors, technicians that do what I do, what we do for a living, we have all these great, tools and techniques and things, and we think that the stuff that we do is the super hard stuff. When in fact, from the family member's perspective, it's the super easy stuff, because they just can go hire folks who can bring these ideas to them. The really, really difficult stuff that we as advisors is really the family relational issues. And you mentioned various folks that you've had on these podcasts, and I would encourage, family members to focus and family offices as well as, family enterprises, that to engage in what we technicians call the soft stuff, but it's really the hard stuff for the family, and to engage in those conversations earlier than later. If someone wants to leave, we can figure out a way to help them leave. I say we, the collective we, the professional community, the advisors to the family. If the governance isn't in place today, hopefully we don't have to litigate an exit. That is the absolute worst thing that any family can do, whether it's public or in private. Litigation is not for the faint of heart. It's expensive. It creates animosity. And so that's the last place we would want to take anybody. But so we can technically help folks separate. How they do it, again, I think you raise a good point. Again, if people are so inclined, if they want to come together and create, a family office that serves an unrelated, group of, I'm going to say not family members, an unrelated group of investors, that model is out there. Oftentimes, that's, how professional investment firms get created. People pull their money together to do some things together. And then the next thing you know, people are watching what they're doing and seeing the returns that they're getting, and they start to attract outside capital. And before you know it, you have a new fund created. But I do think there are technical challenges to unrelated people coming together to create, it's certainly a for-profit family office. If it's just a cost-sharing arrangement and people aren't worried about, tax and fee efficiency under our current law, well, anybody can come together and share expense of an office. It's just like why was shared office space successful? Because it was just a shared cost. So I think that could work. We don't see a lot of that. I haven't seen a lot of that in my experience.
Yeah, I would call that kind of a small non-commercial MFO. And like you said, usually there's a tendency to say, this is costing us money. We're actually doing pretty good on the investing side. We're already kind of an MFO. Why don't we start to open up our kitchen and become a restaurant and take in others? And sometimes that creates amazing companies, and oftentimes it's perhaps not so great. That would be a different subject for a different podcast, but I felt like imparting that.
Sure.
If they elect to go in their own direction, you at least want to say, and again, hopefully parting on good terms, because that's always good for the family. They at least want to do the single family office correctly. And part of doing it correctly, and what they may have felt was not done correctly before, are some of the things we already discussed. What's our purpose? Do we have a vision, mission, and values? What's our governance? Are we going to be more rigorous and institutional? Are we going to have guidelines maybe against family members working in the family office? We did a podcast last week with a gentleman in Europe that worked for multiple SFOs and said, Angelo, what I've learned is if the family members are involved in a more professional family office, that's probably not going to be a good fit for me. And he went into an hour's worth of reasons why. You could go back and listen to that podcast. I agreed with about 80% of what he said. But you are one of the leading authorities on the structuring issue of a family office. Almost all of our listeners are going to be familiar with Lender versus the IRS that came down December of 2017. Many of you know that Pathstone and Allan were heavily involved for a long time with the Lender family, and along with great legal and other tax counsel, gave them amazing advice. They beat, now that was specific to their case, but they beat the IRS. And it allowed, or it gave a bit of a guideline.
Angela, I'd like not to say we beat the IRS. I'd like to say we convinced the IRS that the structure was proper.
That's a very political way to say it, but I like it and I will use that. But if you could talk, now we've done
Lender versus commissioner was the case.
And yes, you could all look it up again from December of 2017 is when the ruling came down, and practically everyone in the single family office community is familiar with it. We've done podcasts on it with you, with Tom Handler and others before, so we don't want to do an hour on it, but if we could give a couple of minutes to, if you're going to do it, at least do it right. And here's perhaps some general guidelines to follow on setting up the structures and how they intertwine.
You know, Angelo, so the case, you know, it's not that I remember every date of every tax court memorandum decision that came out, but I do remember the date, December 13th of 2017, that the case was reported out. And I'll have to say, you know, we're coming up on 3 years this December since the case was reported, and the holding came out, and there has been. You know, again, the Tax Act, the 2018 Tax Act that was passed on December 22nd of 2017 by the Trump administration, which was the promised, you know, Christmas gift of that year. You know, there has been it took away for 8 years people's ability to deduct miscellaneous itemized deductions, which is where people typically would be deducting their investment advisory expenses and other expenses related to the production of income. There's been a lot of activity in the last almost three. I mean, there was activity for years. Families were structuring themselves as for-profit family offices for 25 plus years. But there has been a plethora of activity in the last 3 years. And I would say, you know, not everybody has a good fact set for a for-profit family office. And there's certainly not one size fits all. The one thing that, you know, I would say that has disturbed me, maybe is the right way to say it, in these past several years, is that folks who don't have a lot of experience in the professional community, having their client come to them where they've had this, the idea of the creation of a for-profit family office presented to them, and folks who look at, and who then, for, you know, relatively, you know, they're relatively new to this, they read the lender case and they say, you don't have the lender facts, you can't do this. And I think I've said this on one of your podcasts before, I think that's absolutely bad advice. You don't have to have the lender facts to have a for-profit family office. Listen, lender had great facts, and I think that was one of the reasons that the court held that they were a for-profit family office, and that their expenses in running their family office, and I'm sorry to quote IRS code sections here, but I am a tax geek at heart, but you know, that they were ordinary necessary section 162 business expenses versus, you know, investment related section 212 expenses. So but so the idea that if you don't have the lender facts, you can't do this, I think is a misnomer. So that's one thing I want to just say and get out there. Two, not, and that being said, not every fact pattern in my mind is a good fact pattern for for-profit family office. So there are some fantastic law firms, accounting firms, and multifamily offices like Pathstone who have deep experience in this, who can help people navigate these waters. So I'll stop there because I said a lot, and I'm not sure I answered your question. I may have just been making a statement.
No, you did. I mean, this is a subject that you can't really cover in 5 minutes. But yeah, creating the for-profit entity, usually as a C Corp, and the bonus 162, and that's technically the SFO or the management company. It's that for-profit part of it that makes it, quote unquote, a real business and able to deduct applicable expenses. So therefore, that's the potential advantage to doing it in a way that could be advantageous from possibly a tax enhancement perspective, which I could argue then makes a single family office, even if it's small and virtual, potentially possible at lesser dollar amounts than what people have said before about $250 million or $500 million. And I would agree. I think a combination of virtual outsourcing of the lender versus IRS and a framework to follow of technology have all made the capability, in my opinion, of having lesser dollar amounts to still maintain an SFO viable.
Let me say this, Angelo. We do not, one, there's been a lot of activity, and we continue to see a lot of activity, and we continue to participate in a lot of activity. I mean, the call I had 2 hours ago from the seat that I'm sitting in was, with a family, a $500 million family that has a $500 million operating. So they have a $500 million family office and a $500 million operating company. Is trying to determine whether or not, and they have, a third, non-family member employees in their family office, and they're considering setting up, a for-profit family office. The government is certainly aware of the activity. And we're not seeing, there's been no new cases that we're aware of other than lender in a case called Hellman, which is beyond our just talk this morning or this afternoon, excuse me. Might be morning somewhere.
Of course it is.
It's still on the West Coast. But what I will say, and where I really encourage people who are thinking about this to get the best experts they can to surround them is the art of the design, is in the part of it is that all of this comes from partnership taxation. The ability, a hedge fund or a PE fund that takes the majority of their compensation through a carried interest or a profits interest does that because they are managing capital inside of a structure that's taxed as a partnership. And so the piping of these structures, comes through smart partnership taxation experts. And so where I think the future is going to be and where the scrutiny is going to be, besides the overall, scrutiny of, is this just is this a facade where a wealthy family member is managing their own money, which is the Higgins case, which wouldn't stand muster. But where is really the design of in the partnership. And I think that in the future, that's where the scrutiny is going to be. The scrutiny is going to be on the carry. Is it a real carry? Is it a real carry other than, is it not a disguised fee? And so, I would say, certainly in the last year plus, a lot of our focus in this has really been on the technical piping of the partnerships and making sure that they're structured properly and that the carry is structured as a real substantial economic carry.
Yeah, that's incredibly important. And a lot of that goes back to the alternative investments industry and partnerships way back in the beginning of hedge funds in the late 40s. And I believe in New York, it was the legal firm Seward and Kissel that in the mid 50s basically found it's not a loophole, but the opportunity for what you're describing. And of course, it's been built upon and tested since then. It is some art and science because, like you said, there may be non-family member yet still qualifying for key employees. And how do they incorporate into the ownership of the management company to pay out? And then we're not even getting into, well, how about the assets? How are they owned? How do they intertwine? What kind of agreements are in place? I don't think this is going to be the purpose of the podcast today because that's a 1 or 2 hour podcast. And even then, it's probably not enough. But it's safe to say it's complex. It is a combination of art and science. What I will say, and Allan's going to be too modest, he talks about there are, a limited number of people that truly know this inside and out, and he happens to be one of them. So Allan and certainly the team at Pathstone are one of the true thought leaders in the aspect of structuring and greater trends in the single family office. Let me read one of the questions we're getting also from a participant, Allan. When there is a private trust company and or single family office with proven costly mismanagement, despite governance, all efforts to communicate this have been exhausted and many family members simply turned a blind eye. What are the suggested next steps? That's a tough one.
Can you, I'm sorry, I looked to see if I could read the question. Can you just run it by me one more time?
Sure. Imagine there's a private trust company or a single family office, and the people that are in charge of it from a family perspective are not actively listening. They're doing costly mismanagement, and all efforts at communication are not working within the family. What would be a suggested next step?
A suggestion, would be, again, it sounds like someone who is in conflict, with maybe the senior generation. But one is to just see whether the current leadership of the office would be open to, so what I'll call a diagnostic or a checkup process. Many, especially depending on how many years the structure's been in place, et cetera. We often recommend that people bring in potentially a third party, independent, who can, just like it's no different than taking yourself to the Mayo Clinic and spending a week there and having every part of your medical situation and your health checked out and you get a diagnostic, to go through a diagnostic process, to determine where the inefficiencies are, et cetera, and have an independent third party opine on that or give guidance on that. If the folks who are in control of the private trust company or the family office are unwilling to do that, and if the individual who is seeing that and who is likely has some part of their capital or some part of tied up in the management through the structure, then again, if there's no voice given to them, then ultimately if they continue to be frustrated, at some point they're going to look to figure out how to exit, or they move on to another opportunity.
And in terms of, I'm going to ask you some kind of best practices and trends from running a successful business, a multifamily office. And
I want to just say one thing, Angelo, about that. Sure. It's sometimes it's in the approach, right? If someone's been running an office for 20 years and they've been doing it their way, and you want to challenge what's going on, is how do you, what's the approach? How do you make that challenge? Does it come from a place of, does it come from a place of collaboration and concern, or does it come from a place of angst and, conflict? And I really think, oftentimes, it's how how's the approach made? Sorry.
No, that's fantastic insight. You're correct. Many of us may lead with emotions, and likely that causes the other party to clam up and not really listen to some real great suggestions that you might have. And that's a little bit of the back and forth and the challenge with families, whether rich or poor. In many ways, money often just makes it more challenging. In terms of from operational efficiencies. We've been in COVID-19 now for 6 months. You run a highly successful business. You're highly experienced in the family office community. Your organization and you consult and work with many single family offices. My experience on the larger, more institutional SFOs, the billion-dollar ones where I've spoken to the heads this summer, as my members know, I did a little bit of a research project. They felt in many ways that they had to reinvent what they do. And the basic theme I got from almost all of them was this technology thing, I should have done this years ago, but I needed the prompt because I procrastinated. I needed the prompt of COVID-19 to make me realize that we should have been better on many things with technology, project management, communication, aggregation, reporting, how we potentially could work remotely and how it could work. I don't need to monitor eyes and hands-on 24/7. How have you adapted as one of the world's largest multifamily offices during COVID? Have you adapted? Are you thriving? And what are lessons that families could learn from that?
Well, we talked to, this is one of the topics we talked about back in March.
Yes, but we didn't know better then.
Well, no, but what I'd like to say is that, look, we're very fortunate at our firm. When we created our technology backbone in the beginnings of it over 10 years ago, we created a private cloud before anyone called it a cloud. And, we used a technology backbone that really, whether I'm happened to be in my office today, sitting at my desk, but I mean, we had a technology backbone in place where if you had access to the internet, your desk was wherever you were. Now we didn't create that for a pandemic, but when March 12th came and we made the decision to pivot to work from home, we were prepared. We had, we're on a Zoom call here. We happened to use a technology that had Zoom embedded in it. We didn't even know Zoom was embedded in it. We just knew it was the video conferencing capability inside of our voice over IP telephone system. So, but I guess I'll say a few things. One, so we pivoted to the work from home pretty seamlessly. When you have an organization of as many people as we have, the challenge is how do you stay connected? And so, I think a lot of organizations and a lot of large organizations that we read about, Google and Facebook and others, really led the way for those of us to, and I'm proud to say that we also were leading the way in this work from home effort. It's gone on much longer than any of us originally expected. And I'm proud to say that, and it's been reported in the press, but, at the end of this month, next week, we're closing on the acquisition of 2 companies. We're very fortunate that the Cornerstone firm in Seattle, Washington is becoming part of Pathstone, and a smaller practice, but nonetheless very important firm in Austin, Texas is joining Pathstone Price Wealth at the end of this month. So, Pathstone has been thriving in the pandemic, and it's not without a lot of gratitude, Angelo, because we're very fortunate that we're in an industry that's continued to have that our customers and our clients have needed us more so now than ever. That we've been able to continue to serve them, and we've done it in a way that's been successful. Now, what I will tell you is, and I think that a lot of organizations are experiencing this, that the challenge, being a completely virtual firm won't work, and it won't work because part of the power of an advisory firm like ours is the ability to collaborate and to teach our next generation leaders how to become the future leaders of the firm. And a lot of that has, comes through collaboration. And so we've been doing a ton to try to collaborate and utilize these tools. We did all of our summer outings virtually. We've done, all of this. but and our offices are going to look different in the future. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And we've been doing all of this at the same time that, we're going through, not only going through a pandemic, we have a very, very polarized political situation going on in our country. We have very, very, a lot of, very challenging and eye-opening and, thought-provoking things happening with race relations in our country. And so all of this has been going on while we've been working from home. And, I will just say that it's probably, I personally have never been more engaged. I know the leadership of my firm has never been more engaged in, trying to make sure that we stick together, that we collaborate, even in these times. And I'm proud of what we've done. I applaud my partners. I applaud the next generation leadership. We have something called Future Path at Pathstone, connecting the future leaders of our firm with the next generation members of our clients and future clients. And it's really, not everybody has thrived. Not everybody has thrived, and we've had to come together as a family. There are people who are in family situations in small, 1,200, 1,800 square foot condos or apartments, and both spouses are working, and they've got a 1-year-old child at home that they haven't, been comfortable with childcare, et cetera. And they're both trying to do Zoom calls at other sides of the room, et cetera. There are some folks that we have really had to embrace and put our arms around as part of the family to help support them in these times. But we've done two firm-wide surveys to get people's attitudes, and it's been a challenging time. I think it's a time for leadership to step up, and it's been a time to come together on multiple fronts. And I probably said too much, and I know we're getting close to the end of our time.
No, that was great. And in terms of how single family offices have adapted, I've always said the big three, and the latter two have adapted a little bit over the years for me, but it's the quality of your people, their leadership, the culture, the quality of their skill, their engagement as a team, followed by systems, processes, structures, standards, et cetera, followed by technology. And technology is becoming very dynamic and changing things in many different ways. Smaller family offices often have to do more with less, and the opportunity utilizing technology, but also outsourcing. So we've spoken in the past about many middle and back office areas of family offices: aggregation, reporting, bookkeeping, bill pay, admin. Some families, older family members, like to keep things very tight and internal. For them, even when it was substandard, they still like the fact that no one else knew about it. It was all very private. More modern SFOs and newer ones are either having those capabilities internally at a higher level or often outsourcing them. Are these trends in the work that you're seeing at Pathstone?
Absolutely. And I mean, what I would say is we have developed, a 9 or 10 page matrix of services that we, basically offer not on a completely a la carte basis, but we've been, in the last 2 or 3 years, Angelo, we have partnered with more single family offices to take on things that they used to do, don't want to do anymore. We've, whether it's, all various functionality, whether a family office is looking for a co-CIO or a CIO function, whether they're looking for a CFO or a co-CFO function. They're looking for accounting and administration. We, tax, we're one of the few firms in the country that do what we do, that actually have a tax compliance function in-house. So we are seeing these trends. We have had several experiences in the last 1.5 years, 2 years, where for one reason or another, a single family office has decided to shut down, and we've taken over the entirety of the operation. That's an exception. That doesn't happen a lot, but more than that, people are looking, to keep their core competency based on the team that they have, and where they don't have core competency to outsource it. It's a trend, and it's one that we're prepared to help, participate in at the market level.
Allan, the hour plus just flew by. There's many questions, mainly around tax and estate planning during the upcoming election, but we're just not going to have the time to do that now. But post the election, we'd love to have you back with the focus on tax and estate planning, because I think we'll both agree that's going to get very interesting.
I'll make one comment here at the end.
Sure.
And I know, but the lifetime exemption, which got doubled in the tax act that I talked about earlier, which was a gift that no one saw coming, scheduled to go away at the end of 8 years. Most prognosticators think it's going to go away sooner, and certainly if there's a change in administrations, and I'll be very apolitical here, but if there is a change in administrations, most prognosticators think that'll go away sooner than later. And because of that, the legal community is being inundated with requests for service. So if you're thinking about utilizing your unutilized lifetime exemption, don't wait too long to contact your lawyer or to work with your other advisors to bring them, because the lawyers that we're working with in this space are already saying that they're going to the fourth quarter of 2020 is going to be even busier than the fourth quarter of 2012. So if anybody remembers that.
And that was a very busy time.
That was a busy time. So don't wait. Start your planning soon. And because the folks that can help are going to be super busy. Again, gratefully so in these very in these times that we live in.
And Allan, for those that would like to learn more about Pathstone and possibly connect with you or someone from your team, how could they do so?
Certainly reach out to you and have them connect you directly to me or to the firm. But you can go right to the www.pathstone.com to our website, and there's a way to connect with the firm directly there. You can see basically how we do what we do and go from there.
Thank you so much, Allan. I'm going to do a little bit of a close on my end.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Allan. Well, thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure having Allan Zacharia on today. And again, there were questions, but given our time constraints that I had to leave on the table. But this was a really, really timely topic, and one that we will revisit very soon in the future. And that's very important to many families. Everyone, I'm Angelo Robles. I'm the host of the Angelo Robles podcast and founder and CEO at Family Office Association, a global membership organization dedicated to families of wealth and their single family offices. We do a significant amount of original proprietary content. This summer, we came out with a whole bunch of master classes, and they're somewhat explained up on the website, mainly more focused for my members, and a variety of other services. I recommend checking out our new website, which was updated about a month ago, FamilyOfficeAssociation.com. My direct email is angelo@FamilyOfficeAssociation.com. And besides that, we're very active on social media. Some of our interviews make it up into our YouTube channel, which very simply is Family Office. But the majority of our original and proprietary content, services, and invitations are for our members. We encourage you to look into membership in Family Office Association. Allan, thank you so much.